Hope pierces fear. Hope. It pierces and permeates the dark cloud of fear. It reaches down during the most intense adversity and not only takes our hand but embraces our life. It's powerful, unending, and for everyone. Yet during those sinister attacks delivered by our enemy of fear, we have the ability to escape the snare diabolically set for us. The calm of perfect peace, the tranquil comfort, knowing our lives are secure in our Master's hand, and the brilliance of His joy overshadows the feeble attempts fear makes to distract us. Even though we possess the ability, we must not lay down our defense and our strategies to stand firm. And when we are surrounded by these disturbing clouds, fear's appearance within a beautiful moment, it is always the enormous, brilliant power of hope that pierces despair and shines directly through to our hearts. We become embraced by the assurance that removes any doubts left behind. Because when the deepest, darkest night falls, we have the light of Christ to illuminate every aspect of our precious lives. Chapter 7. Dante. It was a rainy winter Sunday morning in 1992. I kissed Paula and baby Shelby goodbye as I left our apartment, headed for church. Because Shelby was still an infant, we kept her home until she was a little older. We both suffered from the new and young parent syndrome. I was 23 and Paula was 22. We were convinced she would contract some exotic disease for sure. I hurried to my truck, a 1984 rust orange Nissan, to avoid getting doused by the rain, but it was a failed attempt. I climbed in, started the engine, and wiped my face with my wet hands. I think we owned an umbrella, but that was at home. I pulled out of our apartment complex and headed down Valley View to pick up my sister-in-law, Lisa. We often carpooled to church, but on this day, it would exclude Paula. I had maybe a 15-minute drive to her place, then we had a long drive to Calvary Chapel, West Covina, a nice 30-minute commute at minimum. But what I didn't know that morning was that an alternate plan had already been scheduled for me. God does that in His unique way. After several minutes into my drive, I was startled by a very loud noise that sounded like a shotgun blast that came from the engine compartment. Boom! The truck immediately lost power and the engine died. I steered the vehicle to the right and stopped against the curb on Valley View in La Mirada. The rain continued to fall and there were really very few cars on the road. It was 1992, so I didn't have the luxury of pulling out my cell phone to call for help. I jumped out of the driver's side and popped open the hood, and there it was. A car battery murdered by some scientific paradox. It looked as if a xenomorph exploded out from the belly of this old battery. But this was reality, and I was not the main character in some Ridley Scott motion picture. After my quick and obvious assessment, I jumped back in the cab and closed the door. Stranded. In the rain. Now what? Do I walk to the nearest payphone to make a call for assistance? I sat there thinking how bad this situation was because this was our only vehicle and we didn't possess one of those money trees I hear about in many fables. We didn't have much in terms of resources. I asked God for His help and I sat there paused in my day, held captive by circumstance. The rainfall was steady and continuous. It made visibility tough to see through the dense layers of moisture beyond my windshield, but not enough to see an oncoming car suddenly appear from behind several car lengths back. At first, I thought maybe it was a patrol car, a police officer stopping to check on my abandoned situation, or my odd choice of parking along such a large road. Then I turned my head around to get a better look through the rear cab window and realized it was not a first responder at all. No, it was a white car slowly pulling to the curb behind my truck. The vehicle came to a stop directly behind me alongside the curb. I couldn't make out the occupants because of the steady rain, so I sat there motionless. Almost immediately, I saw someone exit their driver's side and briskly walk over to my side of the truck. I cranked my window down with the lever. There were no power windows or other fancy accessories in my Nissan. A young guy around my age approached my door and asked me if I was all right. "Hi, yeah, I'm stranded. My battery just exploded," I said. There was a loud boom sound from the engine and it just died. He looked puzzled. He walked to the front of the truck and lifted the hood. I joined him to see if he had any ideas because I was not so sure of myself when it came to cars. "Wow," he was shocked to see the blown up battery. "You're going to need a new one, but everything else looks okay." He was calming and confident. "I just don't have any money for this, and I was about to call someone to help," I explained. Without hesitation, he offered assistance. "I'll help you. Get in my car and I'll drive you." "Really? I would really appreciate that," I said. I was moved by his generosity, especially because I was a stranger. Besides, who stops in the middle of a storm to check on a stranded driver? I guess there are quite a few good citizens, but he made the effort and I was about to get blessed more than what I had expected. He gently dropped the hood of my Nissan and he told me to climb in his car. I rolled up my window and jogged back to his waiting car. It was a four-door, older model than my truck and had black wheels that perhaps once adorned hubcaps. I sat in the passenger side and saw a young child standing on the back seat. His smile was contagious. The seats were worn pretty well, and the basic model Nissan I drove suddenly felt like a high-end, luxurious truck by comparison. This car was barely hanging on. Moments later, the guy climbed back into his car behind the steering wheel. Across the stiff bench seat to my left sat a soaking wet stranger who had the largest smile plastered on his face. He officially introduced himself. "Hey, I'm Dante, and this is my son," he said with an upbeat tone. "I'm Roger. Nice to meet you," I answered. "I really do appreciate your help with this." I glanced back and smiled at his 4-year-old son. Dante had very short hair that made him look like he was bald, and he had a stocky, muscular build on his 5'6" frame. He wiped his head with a large towel that was kept on the seat next to him. Then he began to wipe down the inside of the fogged-up windshield. He didn't have a good working defroster system, so he was forced to wipe the glass on his own every few minutes. Although it didn't seem to bother him, his happy demeanor was too much for circumstances to handle. The car sputtered as we drove away from the curb. The wiper blades were engaged, but didn't help the view through the windshield very much. It was one of those kinds of storms. I asked him where we were headed, and he told me back to his place. He explained further that he needed to pick up something from his apartment. We had a nice conversation during the 10-minute journey. He shared his dream to become a deputy sheriff and how he was in the testing process. I told him that was something I thought about pursuing as well. But most of all, his words were seasoned with Jesus and his love for the Lord. As we pulled up to his apartment, I felt like I was bathed in grace and mercy just by his speech. He asked me to join him and his son. He wanted me to meet his wife, who was home. After our introductions, he slipped away into a rear part of the home for a few minutes. His wife was just as sweet as he was. In fact, this entire family and household were uplifting. For that short time at Dante's place, I forgot I had a broken-down truck, and I was right in the middle of adversity. It's funny how that happens. "You ready to roll, Roger?" Dante asked as he came back into the living room. "Yeah, let's go," I answered, then turned to his wife and thanked her for her hospitality. Her smile sent us off, back into the rainy day. I sat in his car and noticed he had trouble with a stuck door handle and tugged on the door to get it open. It was in such bad condition and was the only vehicle his family had. Interestingly, Dante didn't say one negative thing about it. He just continued to smile, wiped the inside of the foggy windshield, and told me how wonderful Jesus was. "Where to now?" I asked. "We're going to the auto parts store for your battery," he quickly replied, as if there was Nowhere else he'd rather be doing. Thanks, but I don't have any money. Don't worry about that. His words were reassuring. I have enough to help. I was grateful for his kindness. Thank you, Dante. Then it hit me. He probably went home to grab some money for the part I needed. I sensed a hope that unexpectedly invaded my day, and it was smothered in grins and declarations of how wonderful Jesus was. Even his sidekick, his little boy perched atop the back seat, still wore the biggest smile. I'm telling you, that family was something else. As we drove through the drenched streets, Dante explained how right before he saw my truck along the road, he was headed to church. He was compelled by God to offer his help. I love that he was available for such a business, kingdom business. He handled his life in such a way that no matter the odd details of such inconvenience, he was ready to be God's hands and feet. We drove up to the auto parts store, picked out a shiny new battery, and then he pulled out cash from his pocket to pay for it at the counter. Our final stretch brought us back to my helpless Nissan. And of course, Dante gave me the red carpet treatment by reinstalling it under the hood. Go ahead and start it up, he said. You should be good now. And with the turn of my key and every bit of power delivered by that terrific battery, the engine started. It was instantly brought back to life. Man, I really appreciate all your help today, I said to my new friend as I shook his hand. I'm glad I was able to help, Roger. God took care of you today, he said. God bless you. And within a couple of minutes, Dante drove off into the canopy of falling rain. Our adventure must have occupied at least an hour of the morning and most definitely sidetracked me from going to church. But I felt like the most blessed man on the planet. I was supercharged and energized by that encounter. Thank you, Jesus, I shouted as I headed home back to Paula and Shelby. When I got back to our apartment, I explained how my morning went, and she was amazed. We called Lisa to let her know what occurred, and because I'm sure she was waiting for a while. She too was praising the Lord for his goodness. I was grateful for Dante. I was especially thankful for God's provision. That day sat with me for a long while, right in my heart. It was a moving expression of love, but little did I know it would not be the last time I would see Dante or be touched by God's powerful hope. It was an exciting time. The month of August 1993 was filled with a beautiful expectancy. It was the end of Paula's second pregnancy, and she was about to deliver our second child. It was the 19th and a very special day. I parked our truck in the emergency room lot and grabbed a wheelchair for her. We checked into the main desk at Western Medical Center, located in Santa Ana, California, and a nurse brought her to the labor and delivery room. I ran back to the truck and moved it to the guest parking structure. I was feeling pretty excited right about then, and I waited for the elevator impatiently to reach the floor. The doors parted and I turned towards the baby launch zone. All of a sudden, he was there. It was Dante, my car battery savior. Our eyes met and we shook hands. Hey, Roger, what are you doing here? He asked. He wore green scrubs and a name tag. He had that same massive smile just like the year before. Hi, Dante. We're having a baby and my wife's in the labor room. Wow, congratulations. As you can see, I work here right now, but I'm still trying to get into the sheriff's. I was happy to see him, but more thrilled to get back to Paula. We said goodbye and I hurried to my bride. It was a big lift for my heart, seeing Dante just before the birth of our second child. I was reminded of the rainy day in early 1992 when hope found me helpless on Valley View Boulevard. The act of love and grace from a stranger was what I needed that desperate day. But I didn't know that hours after arriving at the hospital, our lives would be rocked by something unexpected in that delivery room. It was no accident that I was met by Dante in that hallway. After a long and rough labor, Paula gave birth to our son Noah. Within seconds of his arrival, chaos ensued, and adversity called our number. You see, Noah was born with a condition called gastroschisis. His small and large intestines were outside of his body, and his belly was closed. The rest of his organs were safely tucked away inside, just like they were supposed to be. Yet, his entire intestinal tract was somehow ignored, as if his body rejected it and turned its back on it in the womb. I was in a state of horror and nearly frozen. Paula kept asking what was wrong because the team rushed our son across the room to tend to him urgently. Baby Noah was immediately taken to a waiting ambulance where he was driven a few miles to Children's Hospital of Orange County for emergency surgery. His life was on the line, and our hearts felt like they were sentenced to death. As I kissed Paula ever so gently and told her everything was going to be all right, I had to leave her there to be by Noah's side. I began a short and painful drive to Children's Hospital. The few miles were not what I had expected them to be. No, the drive felt like decades and pure torture as my daddy's heart was pounding to escape my chest cavity. I experienced tunnel vision, wondering what would happen to our little Noah. But God showed himself even before Paula's intense labor began by bringing Dante to me out of all the places and all of the times. He showed up on our worst day ever. In essence, Dante equaled hope. He represented the glorious expectation found within our darkest moments. Yes, he was an ambassador of the most powerful and perfect hope that exists, the hope provided by Jesus. I waited there in that empty hospital room, desperate and afraid. During those stressful pre-dawn hours, I held on to the only fabric of hope I had. The surgery lasted centuries, so it seemed, and I could only think of how Paula must have felt captive in her separate hospital room, recovering from giving birth. I wish I could be in both places at once. Finally, news from the surgeon filled me with gratitude. Our little baby was out of danger. The procedure was successful, and he was now ready to mend, to find rest and recovery. The physician explained how they were able to place all of Noah's small and large intestines carefully back into his body cavity, which is rare for this type of situation. He was sutured and patched up with great skill. My exhale was felt throughout the floor, I'm certain of it. Over the next 4 weeks, Paula and I remained at his side as he was a patient of the neonatal intensive care unit. A patient. Now that term should only be locked away for adults who find themselves more advanced in age, not newborn children put in a deadly chokehold by this world at day one. And looking back on those days, it was his induction to a life smattered with medical adversity, the likes very few would ever see. We held him and we loved every part of his young life. Our hearts melted with his and formed a bond that could never be broken. Dante was placed within 2 separate important days in my journey of life. You see, it was powerful hope, like a parade, that in its most wonderful fanfare, uplifting sense, and joyful abundance came to me. No matter the outcome of my circumstances, I knew that my life was held in God's hand and everything would be fashioned by his purpose. And that is an exceptional place to live. Our environment and life's most difficult moments cannot separate us from the love of God. Never. I often need to be reminded when my surroundings bully my peace, whether a busted up car battery or my son introduced to life by diabolical illness. God's love soothes an aching heart. And sometimes he uses a stranger with a massive smile to do so. Sometimes his name is Dante. His word doesn't tell us we would be free from despair or withheld from times of misery, both big and small. No, it's not the message God intended to deliver to us, his beloved. Let's not kid ourselves into thinking life's filled with pancakes and extra blueberry syrup every single day. We often will be served the meals that are actually good for us. You know, the ones made with extra helpings of nutrient dense vegetables and other vitamin rich foods we sometimes ignore. Not always tasty to our sweet tooth, brainwashed taste buds. And when those trials come upon us, let us remember they present opportunities for our growth, just as James points out in Scripture, James 1, verses 2 through 4. We always want a mountain of extra sweet pancakes, and never the kale spinach salad we probably should eat instead.